My next guest is Dr. Lisa Lande. Dr. Lande has dedicated her professional endeavors to advocating for teachers and students around the globe. It is her aspiration that every classroom and every school is one that she would want her own 3 children to learn in. Dr. Lande is a former teacher, college professor, and director of several large-scale school reform projects. She currently serves as the director of international programs for the Quaglia Institute for School Voice and Aspirations. Dr. Lande is a co-author of Teacher Voice, Amplifying Success, Engagement by Design, in creating learning environments where students thrive, and The Power of Voice in Schools, Listening, Learning, and Leading Together. Well, welcome to the podcast, Lisa.
Thanks for the invitation. Looking forward to the conversation.
We'll start off with the question I ask everybody. Tell me about a time when you were in the trenches and managed to crawl out.
Oh, that's such a great question. And I guess my initial thinking goes to the fact that I feel like my whole life has kind of been like in one trench, then out again, then into the next. And so I'm trying to think about maybe one to share. I go all the way back to being a new teacher and taught at a large comprehensive high school and was really distracted by the needs of language learner students in particular who just were not being served in the current structures. And they were in a trench, and it was definitely putting me in a trench because I just did not feel good about the service that was being provided. And happened to get some training on this thing called sheltered instruction and came back to, the administration and I was, of course, so young, so naive and thought, this is the answer, this will be easy. And then was told that just wouldn't work because of the way the schedule was set up. And, you know how it goes, all the barriers that are thrown your way. And so I just it was like that first real crushing moment as a teacher of, oh, this is not just easy to make change or do something that you believe in. And anyway, long story short, ended up working with a fantastic counselor to learn about the master schedule, took all those little blocks home on my living room floor and figured out how to move things around. And I think I just was relentless kept coming with them. And then they'd say, well, you can't, great job, but we can't do it now because of this. And just was like, I'm so hell-bent on figuring out how to solve each of these things, and eventually figured out, it's not like everything changed overnight, but did figure out a way to implement sheltered instruction in this school that ended up just being really incredible for the students that were able to access that particular way of learning. So that was one that came to mind. And I think it was so good that happened to me early on, even though it was crushing, but it wasn't just my own doing. There were other people who were in the trenches with me who felt as passionate as I did about the collective crawling out. And that was maybe my biggest lesson from that is, I probably could have never moved mountains solo, but I think the most effective crawling out of trenches and figuring things out happens in partnership with others. And that was really impactful for me early on.
Yeah, and also the fact that you didn't give up. You got a little bit of that pushback, like, we can't do this, it doesn't work with our schedule. So you took the scheduling box home and, it's done more on a spreadsheet now, but I remember those blocks and how they were, the magnet
on the wall.
So that brings you back 10 plus years. But, really, if you're passionate about something, how, just persistence pays off. And like you said, that was a great model to implement at your school. So let's talk about your book, Engagement by Design, Creating Learning Environments Where Students Thrive. What got you into wanting to write the book? And could you highlight a chapter for us?
Sure. Well, this was a really interesting opportunity to do some work in partner. So my institute is the Quaglia Institute. It's led by Dr. Russ Quaglia, who's not only a phenomenal educator, but just a fantastic human and super passionate about valuing the voices of students and teachers and essentially all stakeholders in the community. And we had the opportunity to partner and do some work with Doug Fisher, Nancy Fry, and Dominique Smith, all just incredible humans. And it kind of was one of those things where our work kept aligning and we kept having great conversations in these places that our paths would end up crossing. And then we just decided, what if we kind of did that Shazam thing where you throw all of our brains together and see what happens when we mesh our work. And the root of that book really took a look at the intersect between 3 variables that we found in our research really lead into optimal engagement: relationships, clarity, and challenge. So I think relationships makes the most sense. We know that as educators, and I think just as humans, that we're not going to make it anywhere if we don't build solid relationships with people, and in this case, students. The clarity piece, is all of that research around, are we as the instructor clear on what's being taught, but then how clear are the students? And I think this is an area where the education field in the last, 4 or 5 years has really made some leaps and bounds improvement, but there is a lot in that body as well. Just the importance of having clarity around expectations, success criteria, all of those things. And then the third that was probably the most interesting to me out of the research, and where I had the most new learning in the process, was around challenge. And if I could give it one analogy that I think helps explain that, and I explain this to kids because everything that we do, we not only teach it to adults, but we don't create anything as an institute if we're not able to also teach it to students, because we believe shared language is so important. But I asked them, I'm sure you all have played some kind of game like Candy Crush or something. And what happens if you can't pass a level, and like you have just tried and tried and tried for so long and you can't pass a level? Well, you get bored and frustrated and you quit. But what happens if a level is too easy? It's just not exciting, it's no fun, and you quit. And there's that just right challenge in the middle of that, where you're constantly being pushed to the edge, but you can be successful and move on to the next step. And that's because of the magical algorithms that Candy Crush is led by, and telling students your teachers are doing their darndest to have that same algorithm for 30 plus kids in a classroom at the same time. That's super challenging. And they need you as their partner. So your teacher needs you to say when you are so bored, you're about to quit. They need you to say when you're so frustrated, you're about to quit. And students will often say things like, well, I don't want to say when it's too easy because then I just get more work. And, there has to be then that commitment that it's not just going to be more work, it would be different work. Or when that level of frustration is there are going to be multiple different pathways or solutions to help you get out of that frustration pit. So anyway, that's the big work about engagement by design. The thing I like the most about that book is that there are QR codes all throughout the text that a teacher can click on, and it shows you a video of a strategy we're talking about in practice, or a little interview with a teacher or one of the authors, or an interview with a student talking about the concept that we're writing about. So in that sense, it can be a really interactive read.
Yeah, and I like how you talked about those algorithms, right? Pushing our students, right? How we can find what best activities we can use for those students who, we want to challenge a little bit more, but might not want the extra work, like you said. Yeah, coming up with that. There's a variety of ways to differentiate, but I think, more than ever now, we have a lot of learning styles and needs, and the one size doesn't fit all. So yeah,
Totally
students thrive when they're able to, reach their limits, but are challenged as well. So yeah, I wanted to talk about your current role. So you're the Director of International Programs for the Quaglia Institute for School Voice and Aspirations. So you already told me a little bit about when you brought in Fisher Frey and Nancy Smith, but what does your institute do in terms of work with districts and schools and larger networks?
Yeah, we're really lucky to work with just some incredible educators in systems all around the world. We definitely have a systems thinking approach to what we're doing, the work we're doing. You can get into one classroom or even one school and make some pretty focused change over time, but we're really interested in that systems impact also, and how do we really stay connected as larger groups of educators, learn from each other, and be able to really replicate the successful things that we're finding are working in schools. So we get to work in some pretty interesting places. Our work looks a little different everywhere that we go. What we have is a really solid framework and foundation. There's over 30 years of research gathered. I mean, we've got over 1 million data points from students who have taken our student voice survey and teacher voice survey. We really analyze and research around that, and then that drives the resources, the things that we write, the field work that we develop. And when we have the opportunity to go into schools, we have 3 key areas that we really focus on. The first area is self-worth. And so we really focus on building belonging, that all of that stuff around culture. And we maybe define belonging a little bit different. We talk about it in terms of belonging to the community without being stripped of your individuality.
Mhm.
And sometimes belonging can turn into just conformity. Everybody needs to do the same, be the same, look the same.
Yeah.
And we really work on how do you create a culture where you belong, but within that you celebrate and recognize the awesomeness that every single individual brings to that community. And so belonging and self-worth in general is a huge construct that we work on in schools. And then engagement is the next,
Mhm.
which was kind of, I think, why that engagement by design work really took root out of that. And just looking at how do we help kids to embrace fun and excitement in school, where it's not
Mhm.
just another drag day that I have to get through, but no, this can actually be a pretty fun and exciting place to learn. Looking at how do we facilitate students growing their creativity and curiosity and really making learning like a spirit of adventure. I'm in this, I'm on it, on the journey. And then our last construct that we work on, our last guiding principle, is purpose. And that's
Mhm.
actually where our boss, Dr. Quaglia, has really extended his research in the last couple of years. And we have a ton of new work and resources coming out, writing underworks, but really looking at how do we help both students and teachers, every educator, really be grounded in their purpose. We all know this has been a hard last 5 or 6 years in large over the last 5 years within education,
Mhm.
and really looking at as we're still trying to kind of regroup and figure out the future path where we're going to have bounce back to higher morale and teachers feeling good about their workload and their ability to meet the needs of their students, that I think right now is feeling really overwhelming to many.
Mhm.
Purpose is really key to that, and looking at how can we really extend that purpose piece to both teachers and to students in a meaningful way.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, and like you said, these are really keys to having a successful school culture environment. Classrooms where students thrive. So definitely, I'll ask at the end about ways that people can get in touch with you and the Quaglia Institute. So you're also doing some work co-designing and directing a statewide professional learning network in Idaho. So talk to me a little bit about that.
So I did do that. That was definitely a part of my past,
Mhm.
in my, I guess, former professional life to this current role. But again, kind of back to that systems piece of just looking at, I think we're kind of over this, but it can be really devastating when schools get identified as needing improvement.
Mhm. Mhm.
And we just look at that as an opportunity to say, all right, yep, we've got areas for growth. So rather than feeling upset about it, let's figure out what are we going to do about it. And one of the things I believe in really passionately is place-based support. So everywhere that we work, we are looking to create really strong local partnerships, looking for respected educators to partner with other organizations that are passionate about providing support to students. Kind of, I guess, it connects to my opening example, just really believing that no one person can make the change that needs to happen in isolation, that we've really got to work together. And we also really view students as key partners. That's actually one of the things I like the most about my current job, and everything that I've tried to do in previous roles as well, is not just working with adults, but bringing students to the table at every opportunity possible.
Mhm.
One, it's more exciting, and I think we get a little bit boring as adults,
Mhm.
and we tend to have the same conversations over and over at times. And
Yeah.
students are the ultimate disruptors. You throw a student into the mix as we're analyzing data or talking about complex solutions, and 10 times out of 10, they will end up saying the most profound thing that people walk away with from that meeting or that day of learning. And yes, we're really grounded in partnerships and also bringing students to the table as well.
Mhm. Mhm. That leads a little bit into I wanted to discuss your other book, Power of Voice in Schools, Listening, Learning, and Leading Together. So,
Yeah.
how do students tie in that philosophy when we're trying to work with student groups? How would you suggest if there's a school, a middle or high school maybe that wants to um, have more student voice, where would they get started?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I appreciate that. What we often find is when we throw this term student voice out is, first of all, everybody has a totally different idea of what that even means.
Mhm,
And we often get the response, well, we do that, we have that.
mhm,
And then when we probe and ask more questions, because I'm sure you do, every school has some kind of student voice things that are happening. But often the traditional practices is, well, we have student council, or
yeah.
we have a focus group once every year, or maybe once every few years when we're on a accreditation cycle, or we, and there are these kind of token things, and I'm not anti those things. They are all important stepping stones. We're just always looking for the and also, because often those types of traditional practices are giving student voice to a small
Mhm,
few, and often
yeah.
to students who are natural leaders, whose voices are easy to listen to because they say the things that we want to hear, and they're well spoken, and we're looking for student voice for all. So how do we create systems and structures where all kids are going to have the opportunity to know that their voice is valued and heard, where we do lots of different focus groups as a regular part of our practice with random selection. So we're not just hearing the same few voices over and over, where we're committed to creating leadership opportunities for every single student at school. And that's, of course, going to look different from the
Mhm,
ones who say, I don't want to be a leader, that's not for me, all the way to the ones who really want it. It's going to look different, but that we believe that ought to be part of school for all students, is learning to become a leader, at minimum, to be a leader of your own life and of your learning, and to grow confidence in that. So, we do kind of these little self-analysis audits. We have lots of self-reflection tools.
mhm,
We never
mhm,
come into a place and say, oh, well, you're not doing it right, here's the right way to do it. Rather, we engage in a lot of internal reflection and figuring out, so what is happening that's amazing that we can keep growing,
mhm,
and what's going to be next. How do we have another book that's called Aspire Higher. How do we take what's great and then aspire higher and figure out how are we going to grow those practices so that all students are benefiting.
mhm, mhm. Yeah, and that's something like you said, a lot of places think they're doing what needs to be done in terms of student voice, but that doesn't really happen that often. And
Yeah, yeah,
student council is that group of the few
right.
outgoing students, right? It doesn't necessarily represent everybody. So yeah,
Yeah.
great to kind of get a little bit more ideas about that. Well, we've talked a lot about your work right now, and uh, kind of aligned with your book and with the Quaglia Institute, and working with um, the learning environments and teachers. How can they differentiate? And then some of the work that you did in the past, just talking about bringing in the sheltered instruction model. Out of everything we've talked about, what's one thing you'd like listeners to remember?
Hmm, that's a great question. I think just to remember that your voice matters, as do the voices of others around you. And I think sometimes we can just kind of get caught in the struggle. And we all know that there are a lot of big challenges facing educators right now. But all of our voices matter, and we don't believe that we can get out of our current trenches if we don't work together. And we do that through that model that you mentioned earlier: listening, learning, and leading. That we've got to get better at listening to each other, at playing in the same sandbox, putting aside a little bit of the frustration and replacing that with just a little bit more openness to listening to each other. But then we've got to also really learn from what we hear. Because we see sometimes students actually describe it as fake listening. They tell us
Mhm.
grown-ups are really good at fake listening. Yeah, they'll invite us to a meeting and listen to us for 10 minutes. And then it's like, all right, check, we did that. And they send us on their way.
Sure.
That's really different than really deeply learning from the things that
Mhm.
we're hearing, and circling back and letting people know what we have learned from the things that they share. And then where the real trust is built and where change happens is when we then use what we've listened and what we've heard from what we've listened to, what we've learned from that, and then use that to partner together to really lead with one another. Leadership cannot be a solo endeavor. I'm convinced there's not one human on the planet who could solve these complex issues we're facing alone, but it has to be done in partnership with each other, and including students.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, that's so important to remember. Where can people find you online and connect with you?
Sure. Well, I'm on Twitter at Lisa_Lande. And then we have a website with a ton of free resources, actually, and a whole section that's called Schools in Action, that has, because I know today I'm just kind of sharing a quick little rundown of theory and very general ideas, but I think the section of our website called Schools in Action really shows you what schools are doing, and it can be a great place of inspiration to just say, oh, well, we wouldn't do that exactly the same, but I can take that idea and run with it in a way that would work in my unique setting. And our website is quagliainstitute.org, Quaglia Institute.org. So come check us out. And also my contact information is there if anybody wants to reach out and continue a conversation.
Great, great. Well, it was a pleasure having you on the Out of the Trenches podcast today, hearing more about your work and supporting schools and some of your ideas for listening to our students and having them be more involved at our school buildings.
Well, pleasure to meet with you, and thanks for all the awesome work that you're doing to highlight some really cool stories. I went back and listened to some of your episodes and really enjoyed the wide variety, man, of people that you are connecting with and hearing about the great work that's happening out there. So thank you.